Welcome to AntArctic Stories, a podcast that takes you behind the scenes into the rich world of people who live, work, and undertake daring expeditions in the polar regions. My name is Heather Thorkelson, and I'll be your host today. Sarah Woodall is the Tourism and Business Development Consultant at Commune Qaqortoq in the South Greenland town of Qaqortoq. She is the only Paraguay-born naturalized American citizen currently living in Qaqortoq, not to mention the only in the country. And all this is a journey that began 7 years ago with a summer internship at Visit Greenland in Nuuk, which subsequently turned into getting her dream job and ultimately led to the biggest change in her life, moving to Greenland full-time. Sarah worked at Visit Greenland, the National Tourist Board in Nuuk, for 6 years with various positions such as Senior Consultant, International Relations, Research Consultant, and Content Creator. This gave her the incredible opportunity to travel all over Greenland, engage in nearly every adventure activity possible, and even travel internationally as an ambassador for tourism in Greenland. Sarah's education is in Sustainable Destination Management, and she holds a Master of Tourism Administration degree from the George Washington University School of Business in Washington, D.C. She has previously been co-owner of the local sailing company Greenland Expeditions by Land and Sea. As any good Greenland resident, Sarah's biggest hobby is spending time in nature, be that for a day hike up a mountain outback with friends, or a weekend in the fjord, sleeping either on board her and her boyfriend's boat or staying in their friend's cabin. Other hobbies include CrossFit training and making delicious creations in the kitchen. Sarah Woodall, welcome to AntArctic Stories.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to speaking to you because I've been following you for quite some time on Instagram, and I feel like I get this amazing insider's look into life in Greenland. And, you not being from there, it's like you have this really unique, fresh perspective of a non-native person. And I think you have an idea of what it is that people like me might be interested to learn about. So before you had this really amazing opportunity in 2012 to go on the internship to Greenland, had you been drawn to Greenland or cold places at all? Or was this just a happy accident that you went there and then you fell in love with it?
Oddly enough, I have to answer honestly that no, I don't think Greenland had ever crossed my mind before. I had always imagined I would end up somewhere around the equator in a Spanish-speaking country, but I have no doubt in my mind that this was no accident. Back on that day, when I went to this presentation about internship opportunities at the school I was attending, I got goosebumps the moment that I started seeing these images of Greenland, and I felt quite literally compelled to get out of the one internship commitment I had already taken and choose Greenland instead. So I call it fate. Others might laugh at me for that, but I don't care. I'm 100% convinced that this was meant to be.
That's really interesting. It's funny how that happens, that you just get thrown into a certain scenario and you're like, wow, this is the right place,
Yeah, totally.
So for the first 6 years of living in Greenland, you were actually based in the capital of Nuuk, which has a population of just under 18,000 inhabitants. Can you tell us a little bit about the transition of moving from Washington, D.C. to Nuuk? And, what was really tough for you to get used to? And then also, what didn't you miss at all?
The transition was really easy for me. To be honest, I don't think I even used the word transition because it never felt like a change to me. And it sounds weird, but even before landing, when I'm looking out the window at this immense, gorgeous land and a lot of ice in the water off the East Coast, I had this feeling of like I'm coming home. It was just really comfortable. I can't describe it. I mean, the biggest difference is the huge landscape that you see literally from every spot in town. And that goes for everywhere in Greenland, not just Nuuk. But high mountains, the fjord, the open sea, they're just like the backyard. What I did not miss at all, still do not miss at all, is allergy season. Trees or flowers here that affect me. And that was definitely not the case in the United States. I had horrible allergies there. I also don't like traffic. I used to be able to sit in traffic for an hour to go to work in Washington, D.C. And here, I mean, it's a traffic jam if you're sitting for 5 minutes. So two pretty big differences, superficial differences, but nonetheless, things I do not miss at all.
Yeah.
Transition, it was super easy because I had a host family that I lived with, and they made me feel like part of the family right from the start. And warm people, they make such a difference, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the distance between yourself and like family and friends from, your life up until you moved to Greenland?
I mean, my family has always been really open for me having my own space, and I'm very independent anyway. I mean, I went to boarding school for high school already as a 13-year-old, so I'm very used to spending long periods of time away from my family. So that was really nothing new at all. My friends, it was definitely like hard to leave them and knowing they were back home, having fun and going to festivals and things like that. But for me, I don't know. I just felt much more comfortable and better and calmer in Greenland. So it became Greenland was my home, and I was homesick for Greenland and not so much homesick for the United States anymore.
What a huge change, considering you thought that you would end up somewhere closer to the equator in a hot country, and here you are in literally the polar opposite.
Yeah. I mean, I never would have expected it, but life is really funny that way.
Yeah. So what is it, and I'm going to slaughter the name of this town that you live in, but I'm going to try anyways. What is it that made you decide to move to Qaqortoq?
That was a decision my boyfriend and I decided that together. In 2018, in the start of the year, we realized a dream of buying a ship. We were going to sail with tourists, and we wanted to sail primarily in South Greenland because we wanted to do something different and get to places that the majority don't see. At this time, the vast majority of travelers, they're going to the north. So moving to the south and having the whole shebang in south, that was all part of the plan. But just to hop forward and give a little bit of a follow-up about that, we still have the ship, but the timeline went just differently than we had hoped with both moving south and renovating the ship. So the idea of sailing with tourists is on hold now. And then I'm back in the workforce at the regional municipality as a consultant. But yeah, nonetheless, we're happy for that. We moved to South Greenland and we love it here.
And how big is the town that you live in?
There are approximately 3,000 people living here.
Oh my goodness.
That's huge. It's a huge shift from Nuuk, 18,000 down to 3,000.
Yeah.
And I live at the top of the hill with a fantastic view over the whole town, the lake, out to the sea, into the fjord. I mean, I can see everything. But it's funny to look out and say that I can literally see every person who lives in the town.
Yeah, you got the bird's eye view. And it's true. I mean, I've seen the images from your house that you post on Instagram, and it's gorgeous. It is so beautiful. I really encourage everybody to go and check you out. It's at Polarfile is your Instagram account. Your account is one of the most interesting, most beautiful to look at, and at the same time, really informative accounts that I follow from the polar regions. I feel like you're really amazing at giving people a peek into your life on the southern coast of Greenland. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, how I originally discovered you. And obviously you have a background in marketing, but as this is your personal account, how do you choose what you want to share about your life in Greenland?
Oh, well, I thank you. I take that compliment very much to heart. I always try to blend a little bit of inspiration with information. And my main goal is to show the world like a realistic and personal look at Greenland. I want to show people what the houses look like when I'm on my way to work, and what food you can find in the grocery store, what the view looks like. I mean, just everyday life, unfiltered, sort of. I always have in the back of my mind the knowledge that there are a lot of myths out there, things that people think that aren't necessarily true or maybe like half true. And maybe that's what's keeping them from traveling here sometimes. So I guess subconsciously, in my Instagram, I'm trying to break those myths, like one photo at a time. And like in my work, in my tourism work, we're always looking for the most gorgeous, the most idyllic photos. And while they're definitely real, don't get me wrong, they're of course still created with business in mind. So my account is, as you say, 100% personal account.
But at the same time, I think your objective is working, because I've been to Greenland before, but only up on the East Coast, further up on the East Coast, and I loved it. But seeing your images and reading your stories about your life there, it makes me long to go back. It makes me want to see more of Greenland, and I realize how different Southern Greenland is from Middle Greenland, from from the east to the west. I mean, it's magic. It gives me this sense of wanderlust that I can't explain. So yeah, I love it. I really enjoy following you. One of the things that surprised me the most, though, is that you come up with these amazing food creations. And being anywhere that's relatively remote, I just assumed that it would be tough to find certain niche food products in the supermarket, and also that they'd be super expensive because things need to be imported. Is that not the case where you live?
I love cooking. Um, First of all, it is expensive. We just have to close our eyes and grab it if we're really craving it. For example, we love asparagus and broccoli, and these fresh vegetables, they're usually costing around 50 kroner. That's about $8, €7 just for a bunch.
Wow.
Tomatoes are usually, around 35 kroner. I mean, it's expensive still, but that's what we prioritize, is good food, and that's like my passion. But as far as supply, I mean, that completely depends on where you are in the country, not to mention what season it is. In the two towns that I've lived in, Nuuk and Qaqortoq, I've never been at a loss for good, fresh ingredients. Sometimes the selection is like a little thinner on certain days because the ship is delayed or something, but there's never been like a food emergency. But that's also because these two towns are in a sea ice free portion of Greenland. So there's never like a problem that the ship is reaching the town. However, I have experienced this type of, quote, food emergency before in other places, primarily in the winter and primarily in the north, where there's sea ice, and that can certainly affect the ship's ability to come into town.
Right.
I just tell like a quick funny story. Last April, we spent Easter in Ilulissat in the north, and there was a lot of sea ice, and the supply ship could not get through for weeks. So the town was completely emptied of eggs, fresh vegetables, cheese, deli meat, condiments.
Oh my gosh.
There was literally nothing on the shelf. So I think we had frozen vegetables and canned sauce every night for dinner, and it was definitely tough because we didn't live there and we didn't have an established pantry.
Oh man.
It can happen, but it's not an everyday occurrence.
For sure. And definitely not for you in the South anyways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you grow any of your own vegetables, like on your windowsill or anything like that?
Sometimes herbs, but as far as real vegetables, we haven't started that yet. Although I will say in South Greenland, so many people have beautiful gardens where they're growing rhubarb. Some people have had success with strawberries. Definitely everyone has at least one or two boxes for potatoes. So it's really possible down in the South. It's a whole new world for us. We have to learn it.
That's really interesting and not surprising as well. I mean, I think I would be the same if I lived in a place like that. I'd be like, what can I grow? So obviously you speak English, but I also read somewhere that you speak some rudimentary Danish because, of course, Greenland is an autonomous Danish territory. But you've also been learning the local language of Greenlandic, which I think is so impressive because of the sheer difficulty of it. I was reading about it, and linguists say that it is literally one of the most difficult languages to learn for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into here because that would be a whole other podcast episode. But can you talk a little bit about that journey, like why you decided to learn, how much time you have to dedicate to learning it, and then of course what your biggest roadblocks are?
Well, actually I use 3 languages in my daily life, both written and spoken. That would be Greenlandic, English, and Danish. As far as the Greenlandic goes, I'm definitely not fluent yet, but I can express myself a lot, more than I give myself credit to sometimes, I think. I typically write in Greenlandic and English in my Facebook, for example. Though in the day and in official meetings at work, I usually end up writing and speaking a lot of Danish, mostly because I'm afraid of making a mistake in Greenlandic in front of important people. But I mean, I wanted to learn Greenlandic already right from the start. Like that was just like an obvious decision for me. I didn't even have to think about it. But at that time, even before I traveled, my mentor, she had told me, you should learn Danish instead. It will be much more useful. And that wasn't really the answer I wanted. So I just continued on my own path to learn Greenlandic. I got a workbook so I could learn the grammatical constructions.
Mm-hmm.
But the funny thing is that was in Danish. So if I didn't know Danish at that time, so I was Google translating the Danish to English and then going on from there. So it was definitely a big process.
Oh
But
my
that's
gosh.
kind of how I learned the two languages side by side. Sometimes I'm in a phase where I'm really gung-ho with practicing Greenlandic and studying it using hours a day. But other times I just kind of go in hibernation and use what I know.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'd say my biggest roadblock is expanding my vocabulary. I just need to sit down and buckle down and learn more words. I got the grammar under control now.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's just looking for like the exact right word that expresses what I want to express.
Right.
So I'm working on it.
So, and I assume, obviously, because all of your neighbors and community members, or most of them anyways, speak Greenlandic, that they would, I mean, you can practice with them. How do you find their reception of you trying to speak with them? Because just to give you an example, I live in Sweden. I'm Canadian. It's very hard for me to learn Swedish well because everyone here speaks English, and they automatically default to English if they see that I'm struggling, which doesn't help me learn Swedish. So I'm curious, what's your experience with the local people who their native language is Greenlandic? Do they really try to facilitate, or do they default to English with you if they have English and they see that you're struggling?
I understand your struggle so well. It really depends. I mean, I have some friends who actually can't speak English at all and aren't even that great to Danish. So we have to use Greenlandic. And I can't really explain it, but my brain can like shift when I'm with them, that I can suddenly think so much more fluidly in Greenlandic when I'm with them, just because I guess I know I have no other language to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
So we use Greenlandic primarily, and it actually really helps because then they can speak in their native language and I can hear and learn exactly how a native speaker uses that word or that construction. And I learn a lot faster that way. Most people these days, also in Nuuk, most people these days, they won't switch over to English. They will switch over to Danish if they can see that I really just don't understand what they're saying in Greenlandic.
Yeah, that makes sense, of course. It's so interesting, and I know I actually only know one other person who's not from Greenland that learned Greenlandic, and I have all the respect in the world for her, so I think that's just great. And I'm excited to continue watching your journey of learning, because I have seen you post on Facebook in both languages, and I'm always showing my husband, I'm like, look, how cool is this? Just writing in Greenlandic. I can't, because the words are so long and multiple consonants together, and it just visually looks so different from any language that I've been exposed to before. So it's just really interesting to watch your journey from a distance of incorporating that language. So yeah, when we originally connected about setting up this interview, we had a bit of a delay because of a trawler that had cut a sea cable that brings the internet to where you live. I would love to hear what other kinds of challenges you have to deal with living in a place that is in many ways on the edge of civilization as the rest of us know it.
That really is like an only in Greenland situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think here in Qaqortoq, we went like 3 weeks without private internet subscriptions at home. Everything was on mobile data, and I think I used twice as much as I usually do.
Yeah.
And some of the other challenges, I would say the biggest one is travel, to be honest. The time it takes, especially after moving to South Greenland, there's been a huge increase in how much time it takes to make an international trip. There's always at least one extra day layover on the way out and on the way in. And that's because same-day connections, you can't find them every single day. There's only one international flight a day from a town who's 2 connections away from here. Like, for example, and there's no weekend flights. So, for example, next month, I'm going to Copenhagen for a 1.5-day tourism conference. And I'm ending up having to use 8 days door to door.
Oh my gosh.
And that's not at all due to sold out flights and I had to go a day earlier. That's literally the best possible itinerary. So using using that much extra time away from my home, that's something I'm getting used to.
Did you, I mean, I'm sure you realized that when you decided to move to the south, that it was going to complicate things in that way.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're moving away from the capital city where there's, I don't know, upwards of 10 feeder flights a day. Of course,
Wow.
I knew that, but I didn't think it was like that extreme.
Yeah, it's something that we've experienced as well because our company occasionally takes groups of kayakers over to West Greenland. And we always say to the people who book with us, like expect delays. You're not going to necessarily be right back at work on Monday because you might not make it out of Greenland when you're expecting to, partially because, as you say, there's all these connecting flights required, but then weather, right? I mean, the
Exactly.
weather can completely set you back for sometimes more than a couple of days. So
Yeah.
huge challenge. So, along those lines, what is something about living in Greenland that the average listener of this podcast would never guess or that they might not have read about in a book or on the internet?
This is such a hard question. I still don't have a perfect answer for it, but I mean, the things that you can't find on the internet, not even the things you can see in a photo, are just how you feel when you stand in Greenland. I mean, the air is just so pure, and you can just see miles, 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 miles without, I mean, even in the town. Okay, I can see the houses, these 3,000 people who live here, but everything else that I see is completely natural. Not even a, what do you call it, an electric line. Everything is just naturally made. And that's so different than anywhere else that I've ever seen on the world before. I'm sure it
Mm-hmm.
exists, of course, but it's just this feeling you get when you stand in Greenland that you are a tiny human in the world. That I
Uh,
don't think anybody can prepare themselves for or anticipate.
it sounds amazing. I wish I could be there right now. So just a few more questions, and then we'll wrap this up, Sarah. This has been such an interesting interview. What would you say has been Greenland's greatest lesson or gift to you?
Actually, along those same lines of feeling like a tiny, insignificant human, plus the weather. I mean, we are just humans, a tiny little dot in this natural world, and the nature will always, always, always rule. The biggest lesson that it has given me is that it has turned me into from an OCD event planner with every little detail mapped out to being a totally like open, flexible, let's see how it is on that day, whimsical kind of person. Because I know that as much as I plan for something, if there's a lot of wind that day, I can't take off on the flight that I want to take off on, or I can't go sailing into the fjord that I want to.
Mm-hmm.
It's made me more open, and I think actually that's a gift for me. It has loosened me up.
What about the Greenlandic people? What do you love the most about Greenlandic people or their culture?
Two things actually. One is you never ever meet somebody just once, whether it's like bumping into them at the travel hub in Qaqortoq or meeting them randomly in Ilulissat, even though you both live in Nuuk. There's always some sort of instance that makes you come in contact with people again, and they remember you,
Mm.
and I just love that. And then the other thing is everybody is nearly family with everyone else. I knew this already, but now I'm really learning that here in South Greenland. For example, there are around 40 sheep farmers here, and all of them have relatives and siblings on other farms with lots of kids. I think everybody probably has 100 cousins out there. Every day, I'm learning that this person I know from Nuuk, for example, is sister to that person who I follow here on Instagram here in the South, and I never would have guessed that. So
Wow.
every day I'm learning, oh my gosh, you're in family with them, and them, and them. It's a never ending story. I think it's so interesting.
It's really lovely. It sounds like it's just one giant village,
Yeah.
spread out
That-
over the coast.
yeah. Spread out over, I mean, the area of Greenland is basically the entire size of the east coast of US, for example,
Yeah.
and in Europe from if I remember correctly, around the bottom tip of Norway down to Italy, the boot.
Wow.
So huge immense space with just 56,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah, sprinkled along the coast, essentially, right?
Really sprinkled, yeah.
Yeah. So, Sarah, what's next for you? Do you have any plans for the future that you want to share with us?
Work-wise, I'm still new in my position as tourism consultant at the regional municipality here in South Greenland. So I have a lot of motivation, a lot of energy and ideas. So I will ride that wave for a few years, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're just looking forward to projects at home and not least the summer season and sailing privately around South Greenland's fjords for ourselves for holiday. That I'm definitely looking forward to.
Oh, that sounds absolutely amazing. And I'll definitely link in the show notes to your Instagram account, to your blog, and any other relevant links where people can find you so that they can follow along on your adventures. Are there any projects or initiatives that you'd like to give a shout out to?
I just want to give a shameless plug for my new home, South Greenland. I hope everybody listening gets inspired to visit Greenland one day. And if you do, you must come to South Greenland and see our Viking ruins, the hot springs, and the most gorgeous remote fjord, Tassermute Fjord.
Oh my gosh, book me a flight. It sounds amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your stories with us today, Sarah. And I do hope to have you on the podcast again sometime.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Antarctic Stories. If you like the stories we bring to you, please subscribe for future episodes. And if you want to help the podcast, leaving a rating or review greatly assists us in reaching a wider audience. Antarctic Stories is a production of Twin Tracks Expeditions, your experts in small ship expedition cruises to the Arctic and Antarctica. We love sharing our insider knowledge to help you find the perfect ship for your next polar expedition. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or at twintracksexpeditions.com.